It was, thank you. And from here, we're transferring to the UK to Steve Towers. Well, welcome, Steve. Well,
Thank you.
your title is already there, so I don't have to put that on. And you had a question, if there are any questions, you requested to save them up for the end, so I will. I wish you have a nice presentation, and I will see all the questions from the audience in the comments.
Thank you, Walter. Very much appreciate that. And thank you very much for the invite, guys. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As you say, I'm in the UK at the moment, but I live in the US and the UK. But we all know because of this current situation, we've had to be a little bit more expedient. What I'm going to do is it's a quite fast-moving walkthrough that I'm going to give you, and it picks up on what a lot of has already been said yesterday and today, in particular this morning with Sven and Morten, and then latterly Wolfgang and Milan, in terms of the complexity that we face in the business analysis arena, but also this seismic shift that's happening at the moment. So I wanted to touch on that, and more particularly give three of my go-to tools, the things I use every day with some of those progressive organisations on the planet. I'll also be sharing with you towards the end a place that you can go and dive deeper into this stuff. Get some free books. We've had a bestseller last year in Der, which was the story of Veolia's subsidiary in Romania, Apanova, and the massive transformation program. And another
Can you
book.
hold the book a bit higher because
Oh
we
yes,
only saw
sorry.
the top line
There
of
you
it.
go. I don't want to
Thank you.
disappear. You know what the green screens are like? It'll disappear behind the green screen. Duh. So you're going to get a copy of that, plus a copy of this one, Outside In, that I originally published back in 2010. And that's bang up to date, plus a bunch of other resources and videos. Somebody mentioned Amazon earlier on. There's a
Hi.
Steve Jobs video in there as well. So there's a load of stuff like that. So let me get my show on the road. So my theme is all about this connection, and I think Wolfgang just touched on it, the strategy to execution, this perceived gap that exists, and perhaps historically the BA role to wait for the strategy to be defined and then to take those tablets of stone and turn them into business requirements and then begin to execute on them. Well, I would like to suggest that some of the leading companies on the planet are doing this somewhat differently. So I want to share that with you sort of first and foremost, and talk a little bit about also this idea that business analysis itself has changed, and the acknowledgement that this strategy execution gap is a key and critical thing that we should all be involved with. So as you can see in the diagram there, I've got business analysis as a sort of a pivot point which connects the strategy of the organization and execution, and also provides feedback. So there's a template in there as well that we're going to talk about. We would all acknowledge that to attain sustainable shareholder growth, so that's whether it's in a for-profit, whether it's a government entity, whatever organization it is, if it's got customers, creating shareholder value for citizens, consumers, business-to-business supply chains and things is an objective. So how can we as business analysts actually do that? And I suppose I should preface this with saying that my life has been bounded by patterns. I started off as an industrial engineer back in the mists of time, but I'm also an NLP master, a Reiki master, and a medical hypnotherapist. And the common theme of all those, including one of my major territories, business process management and customer experience, is patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of process, patterns of things. So not unsurprisingly, I'm going to give the tools that will allow you to harness those patterns in your own world. And the nice thing is they're completely scalable. You can apply them to yourself, you can apply them to your team, to your organization, you can apply them across the enterprise or indeed the supply chain. So a little bit of background there. There's also some pointers to the research behind this right at the end of the deck. So if you want to explore that sort of territory in greater detail, there's lots of points behind that as well. So let's have a look. What's this BA's new role? So we're going to talk about how do we remove barriers to change? That's always been a biggie, but even more so now. And taking that observation of McKinsey, that 70% of European executives now believe that transformation has to be put on steroids because of the pandemic. So how do we incorporate next practice approaches into our work rather than just extrapolating the past into the future? How do we go that extra mile? How do we actually make it real? And then how do we enable the total workforce to get this stuff? so that we're not just in another silo, trying to encourage organizations to change, but everybody buys into it. So those are really the three themes that we'll go across. So everything has changed. That's going to be my first point. And I really wanted a couple of slides that we can all use, whether we're talking at the board level or the C-suite, or whether we're with our colleagues and our peers. What do we mean when we say, everything has changed? Also, this shift away, and interesting enough in the presentations as well, very little talk of the customer. When you think about it, the customers, the people who pay our salaries, and yet we're so focused on what we do all the time. Well, is there a way that we can combine the customer, whether that's internal or external, into our thinking and our approaches? So it's not so much about what we do, it's about what we deliver. It's the outcomes we achieve. And then there's an acknowledgement that some people might say, oh, my scope is limited, I'm in a very small world, so let's look at that as well. As Walter said as well, we'll do questions at the end because hopefully I'm going to answer a lot of the questions. So what's this shift that's happening? Well, classically, our organisations might have created products or services, right? So products, those are fixed things, and services, how we do stuff, and the services we provide, and so on. We create products and services, then we say, great, now what we've got to do is go and find a market for these products and services. So what we'd end up doing is identifying a market through segmentation. So where do you live? What's your education level? How much do you earn? What's your family situation? And so on. And having done that, we put those segments into buckets and indeed then go out and look for customers that we can deliver our product and service to. And it can get as big as the world. What we find ourselves is with a great deal of complexity. As some of the other speakers have said, our world has become significantly more complicated and complex than it ever was before. And the reality is when we look at our organisations through the lens of thinking about what do we need to do and how do we deliver it, it's become a big bad mess. Now, what's the underlying reason for that? Well, to be really honest about it, our organisations were never designed with a view of the third decade of the 21st century in mind. They were created as stable structures in industrial age, thinking about production, efficiency, effectiveness and things like that. Now that world was, compared with where we are now, relatively simple. And yet we've taken these functional specialist silo pictures and overlaid them with customer promiscuity, with customer rebellion, with multi-channel, with digital, with a whole bunch of other stuff that we've put in there that our original structures were never designed to actually work well with. Now, it's not that those things were bad in the past, it's just they were never designed for our future. So where did this insight come from? Well, we can go back 2 decades now and think about some of the people who were the sort of genesis of these ideas. And I refer to the whole thinking as going outside in. And we would all recognise this chap. And he said back in 1997 now, 20 odd years ago. And he talked about you've got to start with the customer and the customer experience and then work backwards towards the technology, not the other way around. And I think we can get that conceptually. But when we come back into our day-to-day work and our projects and our teams, do we have a real view of what the outcome is about? What the way we want to deliver success and how we align to do that? Well, we might be so busy doing all this complexity that we sometimes lose sight of it. So at this point, it was this recasting. Let's start with the customers. Now, it could be internal customers or external customers. It's directly applicable in both contexts. Let's understand who the customers are. And having understood who they actually are, what are their needs? Not what segment do they live in, how much they earn, what's their family situation, but what are their actual needs? And if we can identify the needs, and there's a number of different approaches, and as I say, I'm going to talk to you about one today, the North Star alignment template, but there's a whole bunch of other things like this. And if you want to dig deeper, go to that link that I'll be sharing with you towards the end, which will actually take you to that page where you can go and download a load of this stuff as well. So we understand what customer needs are, and only then do we design product and service which delivers those needs. If you think about this strategy execution gap that I just talked about a little bit earlier, it's not like wait for the tablets of stone to be passed to us. It's an iteration. It's a learning process. It goes up and it goes down, it goes sideways and it goes outwards. And this becoming customer obsessed is what really underpins and drives those very progressive and successful organisations, whether they're in the private sector, and we all throw out Amazon, don't we? We think of B2C. But hang on a minute, 70% of Amazon's revenue comes from business to business, Amazon Web Services, right? So they're involved in all the complex supply chains and all that other stuff as well. What about medical supplies? And we'll talk about all these people. But that shift is one that once we embrace that idea and we begin to do work in this particular way, it creates a whole new landscape for us. From a BA perspective, it allows us to be significantly more effective. It allows us to influence and help to direct strategy in the moment, not 2 or 3 years when we've proven something's not working very effectively. So in terms of this moving outside in, Bezos refers to it as working backwards. And there's a nice video from a guy called Jeff Wilkie in the material at the end, where he's been the right-hand man of Bezos just before Bezos has stepped aside for the last 2 decades. And he talks about this thing about working backwards and what we refer to as North Star alignment. So the first of these is, what is North Star alignment? So resource number 1. North Star, of course, came about from back in the day when the ancient mariners were out on the high seas in the northern hemisphere, and they used the North Star as the only star in the night sky which didn't move to actually calibrate the direction they were going in, how far they had to go and so on, based on time and things like that. So North Star is a metaphor which talks about our alignment within an organisation towards a set of outcomes and a set of goals. And everything we're doing should contribute to the achievement of those outcomes. And we refer to them as successful customer outcomes. So again, whether that's an internal customer or an external one, the same mechanism applies. So this North Star alignment idea is very powerful. And what we've discerned from that, I come from a thing called the BP Group. We're not for profit for nearly 30 years now. Originally, I was in senior executive. I was the director of operations and technology for Citigroup for Europe, Middle East and Africa back in the day. And I wish we'd have had tools like this back then. I wish we'd have had it when I was doing my business analysis and project management back then. But essentially, if you boil this thing down, you can say, look, there's a template here which says if you figure out the ABC, that's the organizational context, to what is it doing, what is it trying to do, what are the projects and what are the measures of those success, and then turn the lens on ourselves and say from boxes D to I, right, what are we doing? What am I doing that contributes to this? And how can we change? So for instance, box number C talks about the measures of success. Well, if we're measuring success as an organisation in the wrong way, we'll get really smart at doing dumb stuff. So we want to look at boxes F and I and sort of say, how can we, as business analysts, as architects, influence the organisation to be better measuring success in a way that allows us to grow that shareholder value? So that's one of the underlying ideas. So I've populated one here from some work we've been doing in the last sort of few months with one particular organisation, and now they're reframing themselves with this North Star idea in mind. Now, is it effective? Well, go ask Jeff Bezos and Amazon. You know, that's been one of their underpinning ideas in terms of their scope of being customer obsessed in everything. Because as Bezos says, if you can become customer obsessed, it takes care of pretty much everything else as well, because you've got to get that alignment to deliver a successful customer outcome. So that's really the North Star alignment template. So that's, you know, something useful you can use. The next key thing that we see, the next resource I'd like to introduce you to, and again, it's more this working backwards thing, is the innovation approach. And we all go, oh yeah, done innovation before, same old innovation. No, this is innovation on steroids. So let me share with you, and I'll show you an example. Concept I need you to get, most of us have already got this, but just in case, Richard Norman, Scandinavian gentleman back in the 1970s, wrote his university thesis that any interaction with a customer is a moment of truth. Broadly speaking, you've got 2 types. You've got moments of magic when everything goes well, or moments of misery when everything fails and doesn't work. A few years after his time, what happened was Jan Carlson picked up that idea and applied it in Scandinavian Airlines, and for a period of time in the 1980s, Scandinavian Airlines became very successful using this idea. Now, moments of truth itself have really evolved in the last 40 years or so, and organisations like Google have made them their own with things like the 0 moment of truth. What is the moment of truth? What is the customer interaction that precedes all others? What is that? And then latterly, micro moments of truth, digging down deeper. So any of us who've got involved in doing like customer journey maps and things like that will be seeing moments of truth on there, but they're happening everywhere. Any interaction with the customer is a moment of truth. And I might hear you say, oh yeah, but I only do internal work and stuff. Those internal people you're delivering to are your customers. Those are moments of truth. So again, directly applicable in terms of being a scalable idea. So let me take one from a business to business entity, which is a Danish company. So I wanted to do European examples because we're in Europe, of course. And this is an extended supply chain where people are requesting products from an hydraulics company. All right. And as you can see here, it goes from one moment of truth to 28. And you have a look at this offline later on. But basically, it's a customer sort of saying, I need this part. And this part is for an engine. And this engine fits inside, say, a JCB or a Caterpillar or some farming equipment of some sort. So 28 moments of truth. So what is this innovation approach and where did this come from? This is an Apple invention. Originally came from some of the fantastic product design back, 15 years or so ago when they were completely turning industries upside down. So what were they doing? Well, they would take these 28 moments of truth. They list them out, chronological order, moment of truth 1 to 28. And here's the genius. What they said was, look, whether it's a moment of magic or a moment of misery doesn't matter. What we need to do is to identify an action that would eliminate that moment of truth forever. Get rid of that moment of truth. And that's the task in hand. Whether it's good or bad, we want to find an action. Now, interestingly enough, when you've found an action to eliminate a moment of truth, you can't reuse that action. So in this instance, where you've got 28 moments of truth, of course, you're going to have 28 unique actions. Then we say, if we're able to implement those actions, what is the value that's created as a consequence? What would that be? And over here on the right hand side, you can see there's a column that says SC or NA. S for service, C for cost, and R for revenue. And NA is, will this meet a need and is it achievable? And essentially what we say is, let's look at the actions and let's go at the ones that give us the biggest bang for the buck. So as you can see, moment of truth 6 here, use customer facilities as distribution warehouses. Well, yes, that's going to improve service to our customers. Yes, that will reduce our costs. Yes, that will grow our revenues. And yes, it meets the need and it's mediumly achievable. And likewise, the other three on the moment of truth, 12, 16 and 28 do that. Well, the next challenge we put before ourselves is, can we harness those ideas into a new set of processes, a new experience? And precisely so. Exactly doing that takes you down from 28 moments of truth down to 6. So much simpler. And all that talk we've had about complexity and confusion around the place and stuff, boy, does this world look a lot simpler. So was that implemented? Yep, within 3 months. Did this work for these guys? Yep, they became sort of top of the totem pole, almost immediately in terms of transforming their part of the supply chain. And of course, that's gone upstream and downstream into their suppliers and distributors and other people who are involved in the work that they do. So I think most of us would agree 6 moments of truth is a lot better than 28. So certainly we'll be able to do a lot more with the same amount of resources. Would this generate more revenue? Yeah, customers are going to come back for more. Does this reduce our costs? Yeah, all that complexity's gone away. And boy, service is so much quicker. Instead of a 6-week delivery time, it could be 2 days. Wow, how would you do that? Well, here's the way that one European organisation has done it. The third resource, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. As I said, I've got to rattle through this. Third resource is the customer performance landscape. Now, I've already mentioned that those organisations who are really head and shoulders above the rest have this customer obsession thing going on. Everything they're doing is about aligning all their work to deliver successful customer outcomes. And that's quite different to getting really good at running a car factory and getting more efficient and more effective in terms of putting wheels on and things like that. Yeah, that might be a part of it to deliver a successful customer outcome, but the outcome we're trying to achieve is our objective. It's our goal. It drives our behavior. We should all be working in parallel to actually be able to deliver that as a success. So the CPL is that mechanism. The CPL will allow us to actually connect the dots and draw the lines. So I won't explain this in detail here, but you can see it goes from a rewards layer at the bottom of this pyramid right the way through to the top, which is the successful customer outcome and the customer. What it allows us to do is to identify what are the things we're doing at the moment and how do they align to that delivery of success. So here we have the good old-fashioned post-it notes on the wall, where some people are actually putting that idea together and sort of saying, okay, we have customer interactions, those moments of truth. So those are the guys that we would say are in red, the red post-it notes. We have internal interactions, the stuff we have to do with inside the organisation to make those moments of truth work. And then to deliver them, we have tasks and activities which produce outputs. So good old-fashioned process thinking here, input, activity, output, or supplier, input, process, output, consumer, right? But we go beyond that. We sort of say it doesn't finish at the output. What is the result of the delivery of that output? And that becomes the outcome. So we have business outcomes and key customer outcomes leading to the SCO. So on this slide, you can see a bunch of people actually doing this. They're working amongst themselves to identify how do we connect the dots and draw the lines so that everything we're doing, everything and everyone, is aligned to the successful customer outcome. So that's the whole objective of a performance landscape of itself. So in essence, it's all about evolving the organisation so that we shouldn't introduce any new stuff, products or services, if they're not going to contribute to the delivery of a customer need as amplified through the successful customer outcome. So I hope that makes sense. Here's an example of the steps and stages you might go. And with these 3 resources, what I've done is I've done some, on that link page, is done separate videos which deep dive down, and there's like 2 hours worth in there, and there's the templates you can download, and there's other resources. It points you at stuff Jobsy said back in the day and stuff Bezos was saying about doing this. But these are the steps and stages. Now I love formulas which allow us to understand the patterns and then be able to model those patterns for ourselves. So it's all pretty straightforward. You don't need an MSc in rocket science to actually understand this stuff. So you start off by, what are the moments of truth? What are the customer interactions, right? And then we go through those steps and stages, as it said, so that we can build this pyramid. Now, the neat thing about this, when we're thinking about strategy to execution gap, is you don't have to go from the inside out. You could go from a strategic perspective and cascade down, or you could go from the perspective about what are the mindsets we need in our organisation to be successful for the future, and actually work up from the bottom. So there's 3 or 4 examples of those in the subsequent material. Here's an example of one, and you could probably recognise, if you look at the top post-it note there, online shopping utopia. Try and imagine who that might have been. No idea. The name gets bandied about so often, I'm not even going to say it. But you can see what they've done is they've connected the dots, drawn the lines, and they've linked to online shopping utopia, which is the customer's successful outcome. Agreed? Now, if you're delivering successful customer outcomes, you will deliver key customer outcomes and successful business outcomes. It all fits together. So anything that's not delivering those things becomes potentially dumb stuff, which we can then talk about, migrating away from. So let's take our example of the supply chain example, the 6 moments of truth, and we slot them into the performance landscape, and this is what it looks like. So have a look at this offline, but you'll see everything connects with everything else. So I can go from the business rules that drive our behaviours in the organisation, right the way through the handovers, the internal interactions, through the moments of truth, through the tasks, actually into the activities and outputs, the outcomes, and then in this instance, this organisation believes they're in the business now of confidence. Yeah, they make hydraulic parts and engines, but everybody in the supply chain, customers, wholesalers, so everybody who's involved believes in this idea of confidence. So that's one example. So there's 3 resources there, and then you can validate them, you can cross-check them, and so on like that. So I wanted to give you something that's highly pertinent to all of us at the moment, and it's a bit of a bone of contention. Gilead Sciences were the first people who applied the innovation in the pharmaceutical world back, 10, 12 years ago, the SARS Ebola outbreak. As you can see on there, we've got our classic pharmaceutical development cycle from, using molecular science right the way through to getting a product in the marketplace. Each one of those microscopes is a regulatory strategic review. And if you want, there's a link later on to the Bloomberg Business Week article, which actually talks about this level of innovation that's happening. So what happened over, this was a 10-year time span. How do you get that down to 6 or 9 months? Well, apply the innovation approach. And here you've got what exactly several of these pharmaceutical companies have done now is, for instance, manufacturing at risk, pre-producing products which the regulator might not sign off, right? It might not sign off. It might not have the correct efficacy for the drug. but we're going to do that at risk and letting customers make investments in us to actually produce product and service in 6 to 9 months rather than 10 years. So this rethink isn't some sort of cutting corners or, just getting rid of the red tape. It's about thinking, what is the outcome we want to achieve? And then is everything we're doing contributing to the achievement of that? So it's just 3 organisations to talk about there. We all know about Moderna, Pfizer and AstraZeneca. And if you look at their time cycle from actually beginning 12 months ago to getting their products in the market, and here in the UK, for instance, 20 odd million people vaccinated already, it's an order of magnitude different to how we might have approached things in the past. Right? And it's not about cutting corners. It's not about not being safe and thinking about things, but you're going to meet resistance from people who like to do it the old way, right? And I'm sorry about that, because quite often there's obsolescence is waiting. Now, it's not just happening in pharmaceutical, is it? It's happening in all these different spheres of our lives, including, as it says there, healthcare, industrial. We've looked at an example in industrial and service. But if we have a look at some of the success stories here, and I talk about these in Outside In, with reference to these companies as well. And I've had the good fortune to have been involved in many of these with my colleagues across the BP group. Think about if you're in the insurance world, how long does it take you to process a claim for insurance? Well, cool, wouldn't that be nice to get it down from 18 days on average down to 48 hours? Wow. That not only saves huge costs, but improves compliance. It allows us to deliver a better product in a safer way. The large pharmaceutical we mentioned as examples. Bloomsburg Business Week have published the case study 3 times now, which talks about how Gilead did it with SARS Ebola, and then latterly how Gilead have taken that idea to actually produce drugs which are not necessarily the vaccine, but they reduce the symptoms associated with COVID and so on. Fast-moving retail environment, 2 days down to 2 hours. Hospital nurses time, I love this one. On average, the particular trust we were working with, the nurses were only spending 48 minutes in the acute care unit a day. Well, what on earth were they doing? Well, of course, they were doing all of the work, like filling in paperwork, dispensing drugs, going to team meetings and so on. Getting rid of all that and putting the nurse where the nurse wants to be from their vocational point of view is saving lives, literally, right? And then the last one there, just to show this isn't about private industry as well. In the local authority, this one is from Australia, just at the start of the pandemic, 9 or 12 months ago, where they managed to take one process which had something like 44 moments of truth down to 8. And in doing that, managed to save and help businesses survive in these fraught times that we've just experienced. Now, you might say, well, all these businesses like Amazon have destroyed our existing industries. No, they haven't. What's destroying those previous industries is yours and my changing needs as consumers and customers. And of course, we're beating a path to the door of the people who can deliver us successful outcomes every time. Meanwhile, high street retailers are becoming superfluous. We don't shop that way anymore. Some of us might want to, and there might be some sort of niche players who carry on doing that. But to a very large extent, what's driving these changes isn't Amazon saying, yeah, we've got a bright new way of doing it. It's saying, no, we are aligned to deliver successful customer outcomes. So the same applies. It was a guy called Albert Bray who originally came up with this assessment. Well, what he was trying to do with some of the board people he was working with was to sort of say, stop moaning that, for instance, if you're a black cab company in London, that Uber are taking over your business. That's because you've become disconnected from the delivery of your customer needs. The customers have moved on, but you haven't. If you think about Blockbuster and Netflix, and how many times, we want to go and chill out and we get Netflix. Do we still want to go to a store which does DVDs or order them in the post? No, we want immediate success. So it's not, when we think of that, Netflix putting Blockbuster out of business, Blockbuster become disconnected from customer success. So with that in mind, I mentioned there's a place that you can go to, and drawing towards the end now, there's a bunch of stuff. There's those three resources, we deep dive into them, so you'll be able to access them from this page. But if you want to see examples and so on about North Star alignment, customer performance landscape and the innovation approach, they're in there. A couple of videos which we linked to as well about Steve Jobs, the customer experience is the process, as he says, and Jeff Bezos working backwards. There is a software that can help, and it's free. It's called Parallel, and it's launched next week, next Monday. You can go and click that button when you get to this page, and you can sign up there and then. If you really love this stuff, you can get the books that I've told you about. They're free as well. And I'll also be inviting you to come and join us on where we take this and we run it over a 4-day cycle, right? And actually help people go away with something we call the customer experience management method, invented 20 odd years ago in companies like Virgin, so that you can go away and do it for yourself. So the references, if you want to dig deeper and have a look at some of the quotes there and that sort of thing, moments of truth. I've got really interested in that sort of arena as well. And some of us will, some of us won't. But remember, moments of truth are applicable to internal customers as well, not just the external ones. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you for giving me the time to share. As you can tell, I get really enthusiastic about patterns and process and our world. People say, Steve, what are you? And I go, I'm a business analyst. That was the early role that I had as an industrial engineer. And that's what I've been all the way through my career. And it's about understanding how we connect the dots, draw the lines, and get over this strategy to execution gap once and for all by being fantastic business analysts. So at this point, I'll hand back to Walter, and if there's questions, I'd love to answer them for you.
First of all, a big thanks for this presentation and the knowledge you share and presented in one of the slides where we can connect to all kinds of our background material. Really great. There are some questions. I will go through them in a minute. You say some companies have quite a lot of moments of truth, others have just a few. In your opinion, should we strive for minimum moments of truth?
Oh, great question. Yeah. Theoretically, I mean, I try to play golf, but I'm not very good at it. Right? Theoretically, the number of strokes on any one hole, what's the optimum? Right? It's one, isn't it? Yeah. So in theory, the optimum number of moments of truth that you need to deliver a successful outcome is one. And I'll give you an example of that in the real world. Any of us who are Amazon Prime, I said I wasn't going to say the name. Any of us who are an Amazon Prime customer, when we go to buy something, when we've already figured out what we're going to buy and so on like that, there's what they call a BFB, a big flipping button, right? And when you press that button, what sits behind it is all the stuff to do with how you're going to pay, how it's going to be delivered, what your preferences are for when and where and all that sort of stuff. And that's an example of one moment of truth which has removed all those other things that we might have had to have done, like what's the address you want it delivering to? Which credit card do you want to use, right? When do you want it delivered? Do you want to pay for expedited postage or something? No, that's all gone away. And that's where Amazon have actually taken that theoretical idea and turned it into that. However, let's be pragmatic for a minute. Not a lot of us are Amazons, right? And we've inherited a way of doing things, a legacy, if you like, of our technologies and our processes and our people reward systems and so on like that, which isn't conducive to getting down to one moment of truth. But to your point there, Walter, for every process that deserves to exist, there's an optimum number of moments of truth to deliver a desired successful outcome. So our jobs as business analysts, business architects, project managers and so on is to figure out at any one time, what is that optimum? What should it be now? What should it be next week? What should it be next year? And progressively, as we change our technologies and our digital capability, as we upskill our people, as we change our reward systems, we can indeed significantly reduce the number of moments of truth.
And otherwise, we keep on the quote you said, like to do it the old way.
Yes, same old, yeah.
I saw a remark from Mark Smalley, who was talking yesterday to strategy. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That was Mike Tyson. And that reflects to the sheet where you say Blockbuster got punched in the mouth, and other companies as well, when the young startups pop up and find a new way to deliver the same product, the same service. Is it good for companies to see if someone can punch them in the mouth?
I think we've got to take our own medicine here, and going back into the pharma discussion, is really from a point of view of we've quite a lot of the techniques we've inherited from the past, right? we're all about assuming that whatever we're going to look at is going to exist in the future. So if we were doing, say, process management, BPM was my big thing. And if we were looking at processes, we'd assume that after looking at it, it's still going to exist. It might be more efficient, it might be more effective, and so on. But the way the innovation approach works is said, don't assume that. It might be that you don't need it anymore to actually deliver the successful outcome. And that's why that technique is so powerful. If you think of a supply chain, and if we'd have applied for my sins, a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt from back in the day as well, is if we'd have applied some of the value-added, non-value-added techniques in that space, we might have got 28 down to 20 moments of truth. We wouldn't have got it down to 6. And it's that perspective about looking outside in, taking our own medicine. So looking within our existing projects and the work that we're doing, how many moments of truth are there in there at the moment? We even had our colleagues over at PMI in the States applying this to their own project management methodologies, is actually thinking about what are the moments of truth that our customers, our project managers and our BAs have to interact with to make this a successful project. Wow, if we reduce that significantly, that's going to allow us to deliver projects on time, to budget, with deliverables like people have never seen before. So that's in there as well.
Yes. And I guess we should find a new role or our next part in our T-shaped being a BA, and that's the one to punch our company in the mouth to make change possible.
Yes, I would agree.
Fabio
Be selective about who you choose to punch, though, of course. Politically, you've got to do the right people. So.
Yes. Fabio has a question. It's now in the screen. The role of the business analyst is not usually recognized as strategic. Should we change that, or should we use another role name, consultant, architect, strategist?
I read a terrific book many, many years ago called Sleight of Mouth by a guy called Robert Dilts. And what Dilts' contention was that oftentimes we're our own worst enemy. The language we use about how we do business, for instance, as BAs, sort of is self-determining the limits of our success. So I'll give you an example about what we talk about. We might say as a business analyst, we're working in a project team with colleagues. And then when we've got an idea that we want to present, we'll take it upstairs and we'll present it. And then hopefully they'll roll it down to the front line and it'll get implemented. And we bound ourselves in that sort of hierarchical, functional specialist silo world. Was the best BAs are ones who don't constrain themselves to that, and they're able to open up what we would think of as a strategic discussion, but it isn't. It's about, are we measuring things in the right way? So our KPIs, are they really helping us calibrate to success or not? I'll give you a very quick example. If you're in a call center and we're looking at KPIs in there, and we've got things like average handle time and abandon rates and so on, they're not conducive to customer success. So it's behoving of us as BAs to have that discussion which sort of said, what would a better measure of success be? What could that be? And it's going to be an outcome measure. Now, you're not going to be, rocking the boat or upsetting people if you then begin to get a discussion. If achieving average handle time is an optimum, that's so we can understand our utilization and capacity management. What's the result of that for a customer? Right? And it might be deviant behavior that isn't conducive to delivering a successful. So as BAs, rather than talk about how can we become more strategic, it's how can we open up a dialogue? And I think we've had this from the other speakers as well today. How do we open up a common dialogue and use a common language which allows the organization to better calibrate towards success?
And that's a
great question.
Nice bridge to inviting Wolfgang and Milan to the discussion. So if they... I think they are available. Yes, there they are. Welcome. Looking at your model you created and the points made by Steve about the moments of truth, is that something you can apply to the model you presented earlier? Wolfgang and Milan, I don't know.
Yes.
React?
I have a major discussion. So what I sense in presentations like this, and I understand where it comes from, is this kind of customer addiction, right? Everybody says best business value for the customer, and that's true. But companies typically forget about their architecture. So I would see the blue circle I presented, this architecture, and keep it modular and keep it tidy and so on, should be also a driver for your business analyst. Or maybe it's a business architect's world, whatever. So that's maybe one difference I sense, right? We are also, of course, customer is important, the product customer experience, that's one driver of enterprise design. But having certain qualities in the architecture that keeps enterprises adaptive to change does not automatically come if you just focus on customer and customer and customer. That's maybe one difference I sensed.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those debating points in organisations. I'll be working in an organisation, and what we're about is upskilling organisations to do this stuff. And I'll often get in discussions with people like in finance, for instance, who say, yeah, we're a gazillion miles away from customers, and our work doesn't involve the customer. And so what we're saying in terms of this connecting the dots and drawing the lines, if you can't demonstrate how your work is contributing to a successful customer outcome, then you perhaps don't have a job. You are making yourself redundant. You need to be able to connect the dots right the way from everything and everybody to the delivery of success, because the only reason why we exist is because of customers. And this isn't about, I'm, for goodness sake, industrial engineer. This isn't about not understanding architecture. So having discussions with John Zachman, back in the day, and using TOGAFs and TOMs and all those other sort of things, they're all extremely relevant to actually being able to deliver a successful customer outcome and producing transparency so we all understand our role. So we can't hide behind that, the customer's not my job. I'm 10 steps away on the value chain that way, and I'm 6 steps away that way. No, you're not. That's just because of the way you've drawn the diagram. Let's draw a different diagram. And going to that point about holistic type, using holacracies, and, we refer to those sort of things like there's a sort of stuff Zappos have done, is everybody can tell you how they contribute to the successful customer outcome, everybody in the organization. So I think as an endeavor for us as architects is to think about, what underpins the work we do. What is the objective of us trying to achieve a better architecture, a better way of doing things? And that's to understand the cause of work. And that is the moment of truth. That causes all our work. So I know that's quite a draconian thing to say for a lot of people, but if we focus on fixing that, it will fix most everything else as well.
Yeah. The moment of truth, I know the concept from service design quite well, but it's quite like usually they really look at the moment when using the service, right? Yeah. And we have a pattern in our book called moments in time. Okay. It's one of the tricks we use in enterprise design to reduce complexity. Is you just focus on one moment, and you look at what everyone is doing in the enterprise ecosystem in that moment. And you find that maybe the moment of truth, actually, there's also one for the employee, and there's also one for a partner. And they all are connected through the architecture and through the value chain. And
there's a common language there, isn't there?
Exactly. And for that, we need the language to explore that and look at and make these, trace these links like you said. So, for example, we have the same comment often from HR. Oh, we are so far from the customer. We don't have anything to do with the customer. Well, then, if you hire the wrong people and they insult your customer, what happens? It's quite obvious as soon as you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I want to add that it's a matter of time frame. If you want to what I sense quite often is this time to market is everything. I want to have the best product for my customer next week. If you go to the C-suite and say, I have the best product next week, he will pay. That's not a problem, right? But if you go to them and say, give me some €1 million and I will help you to come up with an adaptive organization and an adaptive architecture that keeps you innovative on the long term. So architecture is always about the long term, right? And so what I sense quite often is this time to market, and we need to have it now, and we need to budge and so on. And I'm getting a bit nervous when I hear presentations that over focus on the customer side. I think it must always be a proper balance between time to market, best product for the customer next week, right? And medium and long-term goals, because what I also see is that companies don't really get fit for digital transformation because they're not really adaptive, because they're botching, and after at the end, they are not able to come up with better products at a fast pace. So I think we must keep this time frame, and it's a balance, right? That it's an architect's point of view.
No, I would agree with you, Wolfgang. And I always sort of say is that replicability and sustainability is the key to being able to consistently deliver successful customer outcomes. So you need the right architecture to be able to do that. This isn't an argument against architecture. I'll give you one example of, I don't know, are we all right for Walter if I just share another example there? Yeah.
No problem.
In the airline business, a systemic problem before the pandemic was lost and damaged bags, right? So you can scan across our European organisations and think about different airlines who I'm not going to name, but fairly typical, they'll be in the 20-odd percentages of lost and damaged bags, right? And I'll take one in particular. They define their processes as starting when somebody buys a ticket to when they get the bag off the carousel. And they try to engineer everything in between those 2 points in time to improve the way the organisation, reduce the number of lost and damaged bags. Meanwhile, Southwest Airlines said, no, we're going to look at this through the moments of truth lens, right? And we're going to look at this not from the processes inside our organisation, but the actual customer experience itself. And if remember, Jobs said the customer experience is the process, and it starts when the need arises and it finishes when the need is satisfied. So if I contrast, I'm going to have to name them though. If I contrast British Airways' record on this up to 2 years ago was 27% lost and damaged bags. That means every time you and I fly with British Airways, there's a 1 in 4 chance that we're going to have our bags lost or damaged. What was Southwest Airlines independently audited by JD Power in the US for the same lost and damaged bag statistic? It was 0.2%. Now, what had they done? They'd created this architectural thinking across the complete customer experience, from when the need arose with the customer to when the need was satisfied. And when the need arose is, I need to go on a flight, and the need is satisfied when you're back home with a glass of wine or something similar. And within that, the potential for fixing those moments of truth was significantly higher than just looking inside the organisation. So, for instance, what they did is partnered with Marriott, and they had the bags collected from the hotels in the morning, and they got the bags into the hotel sort of system several hours before the flight, and so on. Now, that to me is an architected solution, but it's not bounding itself by the walls of our organisation, and so that's quite a big discussion, because of course you probably know I'm in the Enterprise Architects Hall of Fame. Well, that was part of that discussion, was that, look, we constrain ourselves too much within the boundary of our own organisation. Meanwhile, somebody's reinventing themselves down the road, and we're an obsolete business within 2 years. No matter how good we get within our own business, we could be obsolete. So that's why I get very evangelical, if you like, about, and Bezos refers to it as customer obsession, but it's not being obsessive in a negative way. It's about sort of saying, for every project, how is this going to contribute to our delivery of a successful customer outcome down the road? Because if you can't tell me that, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, but if you can't justify it on that basis, it's not going to work. So I'm totally with you, Wolfgang, in terms of there's way too many marketing people out there who will get big spend and big bucks on consultants and things because they've got this terrific concept, but it's not sustainable, it's not replicable, you can't reinforce it.
And here's our boundary. Unfortunately, time is boundary at this moment, but we have the network area in the BM Beyond environment, so after the next session we can join there and go on with the discussion. Normally Vincent would present, or has a podcast after analysis work, but especially for us today, it's analysis after Amsterdam. So in about 5 minutes that will start, and I invite you all to go over there, and I hope to see you there. Thanks again for the presentations.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.